Alright, David Schwartz reveals those likely behind SEC lawsuit against Ripple and XRP. Now, imagine waking up to discover that the multi-billion-dollar digital asset you own is suddenly designated as an illegal security, and the government body regulating it has infinite power to shut your community down completely. For years, the XRP ledger and Ripple stood on the precipice of absolute annihilation. We are told stories of regulatory crackdowns and government oversight. But what if the true enemy was never a central banking cartel or a government agency acting alone? What if the call was coming from inside the house? In this video, we are peeling back the layers of one of the deepest controversies in Web3 history, and that's ETHGate. One of the most credible minds in cryptocurrency has stepped forward with an incredible, candid, level-headed, and explosive perspective on who was truly pulling the strings of the SEC during the 2020 lawsuit. So let's dive straight into what was shared on X and analyze what this means for the future of our ecosystem. Right? So let's start with our very first question about, did Ripple almost turn off the lights forever? To understand the weight of the latest revelations, we have to look back at how close we actually came to the edge. The discussion ignited when an analyst named UnknownDLT shared a post referencing Ripple's chief executive officer, who openly recounted just how close the firm came to shutting down operations completely during the peak pressure of the SEC's lawsuit. The legal guidance received at the time was extraordinarily bleak. Executives were facing personal charges, a move that was strategically deployed to shatter their resolve and force an immediate unfavorable settlement. The alternative was simple: dissolve the company, distribute the remaining XRP to shareholders, and let the lawsuit vanish along with Ripple. Now, here's my opinion. It is incredibly easy to look back at the past with 2020 hindsight and assume Ripple was always going to win. But put yourself in their shoes back in 2020. You are facing a regulator with a 100% track record of forcing settlements through sheer financial exhaustion. Deciding to stand and fight wasn't just brave. It was a high-stakes gamble that saved the utility of the entire XRP ledger. If they had folded, the president would have choked the life out of every utility-focused protocol in the West. Now, who does David Schwartz believe is truly behind the SEC lawsuit? This brings us to the core of the latest development. David Schwartz, the widely respected co-creator of the XRP ledger and Ripple CTO Emeritus, stepped directly into this discussion on X to offer highly anticipated thoughts. When pushed on the popular fury that a central banking cartel orchestrated the attack on Ripple to preserve its monopoly on global money, Schwartz was remarkably grounded. He admitted he simply does not have any reliable evidence to back up the banking cartel theory. Instead, he proposed a far more realistic, yet equally damaging alternative, and that's the competing crypto projects. Schwartz suggested that rivals within the crypto industry itself were highly likely to have used their influence to nudge, lobby, and steer the SEC toward aggressive enforcement action against Ripple. Now, here's my opinion. This alternative explanation makes perfect, cold-blooded business sense. In a highly competitive market, the easiest way to defeat a technologically superior rival isn't necessarily by out-coding them. It's by tying them up in a litigation. By whispering in the ears of regulators, rival projects successfully froze XRP's growth for years, allowing themselves to capture massive market share while Ripple was forced to spend over $200 million on legal defense. Now, is ETHGate more real than fake? The discussion inevitably steered toward the elephant in the room, and that's no other than the ETHGate. Alright? This is the long-standing theory that prominent figures linked to Ethereum receive preferential regulatory treatment, while the SEC aggressively targeted competitors like XRP. When pressed directly on whether he believes ETHGate is a reality, Schwartz delivered a statement that is now echoing across the entire industry. He stated, "I don't have good evidence for this, but I do feel it is more real than fake." Right? This is an incredibly calculated statement from someone who helped build the very foundation of this ecosystem. While some prominent crypto developers have dismissed ETHGate as a wild conspiracy theory, Schwartz's measured acknowledgement gives the theory a renewed layer of mainstream credibility. He isn't claiming to have a smoking gun, but he is admitting that the sheer weight of circumstantial evidence points to a glaring, unequal playing field. Now, to me, Schwartz's words carry massive weight because he is notoriously pragmatic. He is not a hype man. He is a brilliant developer who looks at the world through the lens of cold logic. If he says something feels more real than fake, it's because the sequence of events is simply too neat to be a coincidence. We watch Ethereum get a clear regulatory pass, while XRP was dragged through the mud. The symmetry of that enforcement speaks volumes. Now, how does this shift the narrative for XRP going forward? With the lawsuit behind us, why do these discussions still matter? Because they expose the reality of regulatory capture. For years, the industry operated under the assumption that the SEC was simply trying to protect retail investors. Now, with key figures pointing toward internal industry sabotage, the curtain has been pulled back. This revelation shifts the narrative from crypto versus the government to a much more complex crypto versus corrupt centralized entities masquerading as decentralized protocols. It proves that the hurdles XRP faced were not due to its technology, but rather due to its immense potential to disrupt the status quo, which made it a massive target for both traditional finance and rival blockchain developers. Now, here's my opinion. This is exactly why we need absolute statutory clarity. The moment regulatory agencies can be weaponized by one private entity against another, the entire concept of a free market crumbles. The survival of XRP and its subsequent legal victory showed that utility eventually wins, but it cost years of stagnation. The industry must learn from this and build a framework where competitive sabotage through regulatory backed channels is no longer possible. Overall, when we look at the entire picture, the insights shared by the analysts on X, confirmed by David Schwartz, paint a stark picture of the early crypto Wild West. Ripple stood inches away from shutting down. The SEC did not act in a vacuum. They were highly likely guided by competing interests who wanted to see XRP cleared off the board. While we may never see a court document explicitly providing every details of ETHGate, the testimony of those who lived through the fire confirms that the struggle was very real, highly strategic, and deeply personal. XRP survived the ultimate stress test. If a coordinated regulatory attack backed by industry competitors couldn't kill this asset, it is highly unlikely that anything else will. And this finally ends our video. Thank you very much for watching and see you on the next one. Or you might just as well check this next recommended video right here.